Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. Planning Commission meeting to order. And, our first order of business is to introduce Saad Qadri, who is our newest commissioner, just recently appointed. He is on video tonight. And hello, Saad, how are you?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for this introduction. I appreciate joining all of you and participating in the community that I belong to now, and looking forward to doing whatever I can to help the city out. So thank you.
Well, we're all looking forward to you joining us and giving your valuable perspective. You've been around a while and have a variety of viewpoints, so we're all looking forward to that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Unfortunately, in addition to the introduction, I wish to announce that Christiana Matthews has tendered her resignation effective immediately to the Planning Commission, and this has been sent forward to the mayor. And she has asked Tracy to read into the record a letter regarding her resignation. So the floor is yours, Tracy.
This is Commissioner Christiana Matthews' resignation letter. She asked me to read it into the record. Greetings, fellow planning commissioners. In 2014, my family and I moved to Kenmore. We found the perfect home for us. My husband and I worked our butts off for many years, and many of those we worked 7 days a week, making so many sacrifices to be able to afford the minimum down payment for a mortgage while raising 2 kids. The house became our peaceful oasis that we could relax in after a long, hard work day. We saw ourselves growing old here in this community, but sadly, our single-family home is no longer a peaceful place to come home to because of upzoning decisions made by our city council and management. It breaks my heart to say that it is because of this we decided to leave Kenmore, and I must resign from the Planning Commission effective immediately, as I will no longer be a resident. Commissioners, I have so enjoyed my time spent with you. I have learned so much, and I value and look up to each of you. I can say with every ounce of my being that I know each of you deeply care about Kenmore and want what is best for the residents and the repair and protection of our environment. Please never give up the fight to be a voice for Kenmore. Each one of you makes a huge difference, even when it feels like the fight is lost. Your honor and integrity remain, and our residents know you really care. With love and respect, Christiana Matthews.
Thank you, Commissioner Benezeski. On my part, I would like to say that I'll miss Christiana and her valuable input to the commission. And we will now see whatever happens at the city council level as far as her replacement, which may take a while because they have exhausted the pool. Saad, you were the last one out of the pool. So is there anyone else would like to make a comment on the resignation? Hearing none, we'll move to the next item of business, which is public comments. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission's meeting. Do we have anyone online?
We have one attendee online.
Attendee, okay. In this form, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to listen. We will hear from our on-guest sites first, followed by our virtual guests. If you are online, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address comments to the chair and the city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all community members, we must limit each speaker to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Screen sharing is not allowed. You can submit materials to the Planning Commission or clerk in advance. Materials submitted after the meeting will be provided to the commission for the next meeting. Please do not comment about pending development projects on which the Planning Commission or City Council will make future decisions, as these are quasi-judicial matters, and planning commissioners and council members must limit communications about such matters. This meeting is being recorded, and we appreciate you taking time to express comments. Madam Clerk.
We have no on-site commenters, and we'll give our virtual guest a moment to get their hands raised. I see no hands raised at this time.
Seeing no hands raised and no one in the meeting room, the public comments session is closed. Next item is the approval of minutes. The November 1st, 2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Is there any discussion or amendments? Hearing none, unless there's an objection, they will be ordered unanimously adopted. The next item of business is the election of the chair and vice chair of the Planning Commission for the coming year after this election is done. So first item is the opening for open nominations for the chair. Commissioner Vanderleen.
I'd like to nominate Dwight Thompson to be chair for the coming year.
I'll second that.
Okay, we've got seconds too. Okay, Dwight Thompson has been nominated to be chair of the Planning Commission for 2023. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations?
Sorry.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do. So hearing none, the nominations are closed. It seems to be that this Dwight Thompson character is the only person that's been nominated. And so, and I will accept the nomination. So if, since there's only one, if there's no objection, we will, I will be elected chair for 2023 if there's no objection. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your trust of my ability to wrap around these agendas. I appreciate it very much. It's a pleasure to serve the commission and the city, and I hope to do the best for the staff who are always toiling over these things and probably afraid what I'm going to do next. So anyway, so the next position is vice chair. Are there any nominations?
I nominate Mike Vanderline.
Mike Vanderleen has been nominated. Is there a second? Okay, it's been seconded by Derek. Will you accept nomination?
I will, gratefully.
Is there any other nominations? You know, Sod looks away, you know, I look at him, he looks away. That's good. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, the nominations are closed for the position of vice chair for the Planning Commission. If there is no objections, I will declare a unanimous vote in favor and for the election of Commissioner Vanderleen as the vice chair of the Planning Commission. Okay, well, congratulations.
Yes, sir. Congratulations. Great. And thank you all for your confidence for another year. Much appreciated.
What a team. Okay, well, that is all done. So guess what's up next? We just, it's like we missed you it's almost been 2 months since we've seen your smiling faces and hear your lovely voices telling us what we're going to have to do for the next 12 months. So we are ready for the first item, which is the transportation element. And my goodness, we do have other staff on board. And so how would you like me to, Debbie, how do you want me to begin?
Well, I can begin this. My voice is a little sketchy. I'm coming off of a cold, so I hope you can hear me.
Oh, we can hear you.
That's good. Well, good evening.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. I'm John Vicenti, City Engineer, City of Kenmore. And once again, we are bringing forth the transportation element. We've talked about objectives and goals, and tonight we're going to be focusing more on the capital facilities plan. And giving that presentation will be Alicia McIntyre with Parametrics, because I don't think I could survive the ordeal. So take it away, Alicia.
Thanks, John. Your voice, you're very froggy tonight. I hope you're feeling better very soon. Good evening, Commission. Happy New Year. I'm happy to be back. This evening, we have a pretty brief presentation for you. And tonight, we're going to talk about the capital facilities plan, which is very, very closely linked to the transportation element. I'm going to share my screen. And once I do, I won't be able to see anyone's hands come up or anything along those lines. So please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions or you need some clarification. Let's see. All right, is that showing up for everyone?
Yes.
Super,
Yes.
thank you. So the capital facilities plan is the portion of the comprehensive plan that includes all of the financing tables for all of the various elements. So this evening, we're going to be talking solely about the transportation piece of the capital facilities plan. We're going to talk really briefly about what that plan includes, what that table includes, because we're really only talking about literally one table within the element. We're not talking about goals and policies. I'll touch very briefly on project cost estimates and funding sources. So this really is a very, very brief overview and presentation for you tonight. So the draft capital facilities plan is a table that includes all of the projects included in the 6 and the 20-year plans within the transportation element, and all of the costs are calculated in 2022 dollars. So just as a reminder, this map shows the projects that are included in the transportation element in the draft transportation elements, and you can see that they're broken apart by near-term projects in the first 6 years, indicated in the green color. Longer term projects that are indicated in kind of the mustard yellow, and those are projects that would occur in the 7 to 20-year time horizon. And then in the magenta color are those projects that would be developed by in conjunction with the Lake Point development by the developer. And what's not shown on this map, but is incorporated in the 6 and the 20-year plans are projects identified in the sidewalk program, in the ADA transition plan program, and the pavement preservation program. So this is the really simple table that would live in the, excuse me, John, I think I'm getting your cold, that would live in the capital facilities element. And you can see that it's all of the projects that would occur over the 20-year period and an estimated cost for all of those. These projects have been estimated the costs at a very, very high level. There hasn't been very much detailed engineering done, so these costs do incorporate quite a healthy contingency to account for unknown elements associated with them. So you can see that the total cost of the projects is just over $93 million.
And one thing I want to clarify is this is just, this is for the pavement preservation program and ADA transition. That's not the total cost of those programs. That's just the cost for this period.
Thanks, John.
Alicia, question?
Yes.
The Lake Point Development Mitigation, is that project mature enough now that you're beginning to think about this? Or is this anticipating that sometime within the next 20 years, it may come to the point, and this is basically a placeholder? Or are we actually contemplating that there's going to be some work done?
So I'm going to answer one part of that, and John, then I'll ask you to chime in on the second part. So in your development code, you have requirements that specifically call out improvements that will need to be made as part of the Lake Point development. Those projects that were on the map that I just showed, those reflect what's in your development code. However, and this is where I'll turn it over to John, that part of the development code was adopted several years ago. And so it is possible that those projects could be modified. John, did you want to chime in?
So right now we're proceeding as if there have been no changes to the requirements for that site. There's always a chance that things could change, but right now, given the information we have, the projects that we've created are based off of those P suffix conditions. And so if a developer comes through and wants to make modifications, that would fall in line with a development agreement that would establish what needs to be done, and that would go through our city council. So right now we don't expect anything, but we're prepared for something.
And it is anticipated that that development would happen in that 7 to 20 year time horizon, as opposed to the 0 to 6 year time frame.
But
It
we're
doesn't mean
still
that,
in a,
that it's required to happen then. That's just what we're expecting.
okay, so we don't have a developer. We're anticipating at some point in the future we might have, and this is work that would need to be done, but we don't have any funding for that. We don't have an identified developer.
We don't have funding and we don't have a development agreement.
That makes sense. So one more question. This is the finance guy stepping up again. How did you, or how do you take into account the recent inflation and how that might particularly roll out over 20 years? Is that included here, or is that something refinement that happens later?
John, is that something you want to jump in on? These are accounted for in 2022 dollars. So we did use recent bid items. John, do you want to talk a little bit more about the cost estimating methodology? This is definitely more your wheelhouse than mine.
So depending upon which project you're looking at, sorry, the cost estimates are based off of 2022 dollars with escalations for the 6-year period. We don't, I believe for the ones like Lake Point, we did escalate it up to the 20-year period based off of certain factors. Unfortunately, it's really hard to determine what those factors are because everything's gotten all messed up with pandemic and supply chains, and we don't really know. So we're kind of going with what we've done in the past, adding a typical factor and assuming that life will be normal in years to come. Things like the pedestrian facilities plan and the ADA transition plan, those are 2022 dollars and they're not escalated to any future dollar. But that program is updated every year or two, those numbers.
Are these bids based off of several different contractors' bids, or is it just like how many contractors were interviewed to come up with these total cost assessments?
So these the cost estimates come from a variety of different bids received from other projects in the region that are a close comparison to these projects and close vicinity to these projects. Where we don't have reasonable numbers to go off of, we do have a state bid list that identifies several projects where they receive bids, and then they provide pricing for those bid items. So.
Okay, thank you.
that is the whole presentation associated with the capital facilities plan. There are a couple of other pieces in your packet this week that relate. They're part of the transportation element, but they do relate to this capital facilities plan as well. The first is a packet of conceptual design and cost estimates. So if you really want to dig in and you want to see all of the math that was done for the various projects, you can see both the conceptual level design as well as the cost estimates. And those are for the 2022 and the 2044 estimates. And these costs incorporate factors including design, environmental review, right-of-way, and construction. It's a complete package of how much it would cost to take the project from the idea to ribbon cutting. And then the final appendix that we have is a matrix that identifies available state and federal sources that might be available to fund some of these projects. And this is going to serve as a resource to John and his team when they're looking at possible grant funding opportunities. It describes what the application process is and also notes which projects in Kenmore's transportation element could possibly be would have applicability for that particular funding source. So then beyond that, our next steps for this process is to have a public hearing on March 7th. So we'll be back in about 6 weeks. And then from the public engagement perspective, right now, the online open house for the transportation element is available. It's live for people to take a survey, see the projects that are included in the draft element. And then on Thursday, John and I will be at the hangar from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for an in-person drop-in session. Anyone can come by and talk to us about the element and what's included in it. That is the end of our presentation today.
Has there been a risk assessment done on each of these projects as far as liability concerns? I did go through most of these projects, and I know some of them there is a risk assessment that had been done, but will it be completed before it's been introduced to us and the city council?
What type of risk assessment are you referring to?
Liability issues, or for example, the project with the 522 crossing. I think there were 4 different. There are four different elements that were issued. One was to provide bicycle and pedestrian crossings, and the other one's a bridge crossing and whatnot. So I don't think there was a risk assessment done for that one. Would that be completed eventually, or?
So a risk assessment isn't something that you would normally do unless you feel that a project we're proposing is not in the public's best interest, meaning that there could be risk to the public or to individuals, what have you. What we would normally do is we would do a feasibility assessment to determine whether or not the project that we proposed is a viable project, or if during our analysis we decide that maybe we need to tweak it. Right now, we're at a level of design where, based off of flying at 30,000 foot elevation, we think this is going to work. But until we get the funding and we get more into the next phase of planning, we don't really look at whether or not a project is fully feasible. We actually did take that 522 crossing. We looked at it a little bit further than normal because we knew there were certain issues and we wanted to make sure that what we were proposing was actually feasible. Because what was originally proposed in the previous one, we determined probably wouldn't be feasible, and we didn't want to put something in there that we knew wasn't feasible. What'll happen is this is the first step in planning. The next step after this would either be grant applications or our transportation improvement plan. And during that process, we go a little bit deeper into the projects themselves to determine whether or not they are the feasibility of them. We fine tune the estimates and the scope a little bit further. And then we go from that point to the capital improvement program, which fully identifies the general scope and general cost of the project to begin the process of implementation.
Got it. Understood. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Commissioner Vanderleen?
Yeah, this question may be more for staff than for Alicia or John, but in reading through particularly the SR 522 pedestrian crossover, I'm looking at this and I really appreciate the feasibility study over the technical piece of that. I think that was very good. But what raised in my mind was, yeah, it looks like it's feasible, but is it truly desirable? And when I look at the addition of, we've got now an embankment there that's a green space, about 200 plus feet of that's going to be replaced by concrete. We're going to have a metal structure that's going to go over 522. I'm wondering, is that really what we want? And then particularly looking at the cost, $46 million, which is probably the low end of this. What is the utility that we get out of this project for $46 million? I don't have the answer to those questions. That's why I'm asking them. But I think there are questions. I'm wondering where in the process is that desirability addressed?
So the desirability for a crossing really comes into play with a Lake Point redevelopment. Right now, your reasons for crossing 522 is to get to the Burke Gilman Trail, to get to the parks that are down there, to get to the Kenmore Air. There's really not a lot of drivers, but when Lake Point redevelops, there will be a lot of drivers that will be a generator for pedestrians. There will also be the future Stride Sound Transit's bus rapid transit. There's going to be a stop there at 68, so a crossing there would benefit that. So the feasibility of this really comes, or I shouldn't say the feasibility, the practicality of it really comes into play when there is more development occurring on the other side of 522. So you would see more of the benefit at that time. How it would look, what it would look like, really will depend upon what happens on that site. And the expectation within our estimates, and I don't have them off the top of my head, is that a majority of that chunk of that money would come from the developer, private parties, or grants. The city would not be contributing much to the cost of that overcrossing itself. That's the expectation. And that $40-some million is escalated to 2044. So, you know, I don't, off the top of my head, don't know what the original cost was for that. It's like 17 million in 2022. So it's yeah.
But John, I think what Mike was asking was why the pedestrian crossed the road.
To get to the other side.
So what I'm reading out of your answer, John, and thank you for that, it's actually a good way to think about it, it sounds to me like this project is going to be linked to things that are expected to happen in the future. But how far ahead would this project get of those things that would be built to facilitate? And where does that happen in the planning process? How does that get public exposure and feedback?
I would say it'd be more in the planning process. The progressing this crossing was first discussed a few years ago about doing a feasibility study to see what we could and couldn't do. And then when we had the prior Lake Point developer, we were talking with them about building this crossing as part of their redevelopment, doing more of a partnership with the developer itself, and whether or not the city would be building it, that would fall in line with whatever development agreement is created with that new developer that comes along. So right now, we don't anticipate building anything until there's something to build to.
That's very helpful.
Ms. Bent?
Well, John explained that very well. But I think we have to have something in the capital facilities plan to give us the ability to consider it in the future. So we think some sort of crossing will be needed based on the level of development, what it will look like when it occurs, who's going to pay for it is in the future, but we do need to identify it as a potential project in the capital facilities plan.
But this is a placeholder.
It is a placeholder, yes.
Mr. Lounces?
So I have a couple questions and it stays on with this 522 footbridge. So if this is a placeholder, as you said, John, or a lot of this funding will be coming from a future developer, why don't we put in this table CFC to be determined / developer funded? What's the purpose of putting a number there if well, right now it doesn't even sound like there's one project that's firmly decided on. Looking over this, the difference between a crosswalk and a pedestrian footbridge, I'm pretty sure the funding for that is significantly different. So what was the reasoning behind this number, and why not potentially another placeholder such as with the Lake Point development mitigation?
So I might need Alicia's help on this question. Was the Lake Point project considered in the transportation impact fees? Because that would be the main reason why you would have a cost estimate in there, is because that would then apply to whatever impact fees we would charge to developers. But I don't remember.
I believe the answer is no, because
Okay.
it's outside the 6-year window. But my recollection of our early conversations, John, when we were talking about this, was that a part of this is because there may be a need for the city to contribute part of the funding for this. The capital facilities plan doesn't mandate that the city will pay for everything. This also gives you some idea of what kind of grant funding you might want to pursue if you are going to go after that as well. So to both Debbie and John's point, if the city anticipated that there would be absolutely no contribution from the city, then it might be more appropriate to incorporate it with the Lake Point development mitigation. If there's an expectation that the city will contribute funding to it, it's probably a little more prudent to leave it as is.
And then, sorry. The main reason that we have the higher cost is so that we have all of our bases covered. If we decide to go with the high end, we want to make sure we have that cost in there so we're prepared for it. If we were to just assume a marked crossing, we decided to go for something more robust, then we would have a cost estimate that isn't realistic to what people might think the cost of a crossing would be.
So in this case, the footbridge is the most expensive possibility, and you're putting a number in that directly relates to that. And then we can go down from there. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Any other comments, questions from the commissioners? Go ahead, you still have the floor.
So this has to do with funding sources. I know that there was a very neatly put together chart at the bottom, table at the bottom with a lot of different funding source options. Is there sort of an anticipated or expected funding amount outcome, or a safe estimate of what could be received from this, or so many funding sources that we already meet the criteria for, we just have to apply for them? Or do you have any idea, or is this just a pretty straightforward thing? And then I guess to follow up on that, if there is sort of an idea, is there any way to incorporate that with, or at least showing the difference between the expected costs and the expected sort of grant or money that would cover this from outside of the city?
So there are a variety of grant sources that could potentially fund this project, really depending upon how it's proposed, what is scoped out, and when you want to do it will depend upon which grants could be feasible. And so without really knowing much more detail about what this project could be, it's a little premature to say, well, this grant could pay for it at this amount. There's a whole lot of different factors that go into play as to how you could fund this with grants. It just depends on the situation. And so it's really difficult for us to say which ones would work.
And I think I'll just append that many of those grant sources are competitive. So it's not always a circumstance where if you meet the criteria, the grant funding is available. In many cases, you are competing for those funds. So it often depends on not just the quality of Kenmore's proposal, but also any other jurisdiction or agency that might be competing for that same pot of limited dollars. And what are the evaluation measures that go into the process? So that's just another unknown. Those competitive processes are very often in very much that they're very competitive. So it's really hard to say what is more of a secure or more of a sure thing than others in a lot of cases, particularly those competitive processes.
And I'm sorry, I haven't seen the chart. Are these grants federal grants, state grants, or are they combined? What where are these grants available?
It's a list
All
of
of them, yeah.
multiple sources. It's Appendix D5.
Oh, and when you say it's competitive, what are they looking for exactly as far as how you go about getting these grants?
It depends on the funding source in many cases. So for example, you might have a project that is or a grant funding source that is focused on improving air quality. So that might be a bucket from which to draw funds. Sometimes they're focused on non-motorized improvements. Sometimes it's focused on safety, safe routes to school. There's a wide gamut of funding options. So that's part of why we included the matrix that talks about which projects could potentially be eligible for different funding sources. Again, it really depends on the grant cycle, where the city is in its planning process, anticipating developing a project, and then again, what the criteria are and who else is going after the same funding.
Okay, thank you.
If I remember, when these this money becomes available, it comes and goes pretty fast. And one of the criteria when they're really hard up to spend the money in the fiscal year is whether we're shovel ready or how many months from shovel ready and demonstrate that. And that often is a big deal, and it's because they need to offload the millions and millions of dollars. And that could also be a factor whether you get it or not, just that alone.
That's correct. Different funding sources also will or will not fund different phases of projects. So some of them, they will only fund construction. Some will fund design, environmental evaluation, or construction. It really does vary. There is no one answer, and many of these grant funding sources, they are on different cycles. Some are annual, some are biannual, and some are brand new. Sometimes new federal funding sources come along, and they create some new eligibility as well. So all of those things contribute to the city putting together a grant strategy. John, I would assume like on an annual or biannual basis, taking a look at what's in the CIP, and then where are you in any project development phase that would then contribute to your conversations about whether or not to pursue various grants. It is labor intensive also to put grant applications together. It takes time. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that process as well.
Right, any further questions? Hearing none?
Tracy.
Oh, Tracy, I didn't see your hand there. Okay, Commissioner Banazinski.
Thank you, Dwight. I understand that these projects are in the very early conceptual stage. So my question is grounded in that understanding, and it's kind of stemming from the Northeast 181st Street to SR 522 East Connection project. This is an area where a road doesn't exist, and we are projecting out what our needs might be into the future. I think when there is more development there, I'm just wondering, is it early enough in the study of this that those alignments of streets might change a little bit, or is this pretty much set in terms of what the city is thinking?
So the alignment that was chosen was taking into account current development proposals, current street access, and logistics of redevelopment. For example, there's an apartment complex there. It's not likely at any time in the near future that apartment complex will redevelop. And so we did not put the road through there, but to the south of that, the parcels are redeveloping. So it seemed more feasible to put the road there. So we tried to maneuver where it made sense through the park and ride. The plan from Sound Transit is to keep the road that goes into the park and ride down the side, almost kind of where it is today. So it made sense to maintain that. So that was kind of the rationale. While it's not perfect, it's the best we could assume at this time. And as development comes through, we can work on where that road would actually be established. And again, as Debbie said, we need to have it in the document so that we can require it for future development.
So it sounds like things could shift.
It
depending
could,
on-
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it could shift, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Commissioner Lucis.
So you're not asking us to pick apart any of these projects right now, but these are very preliminary things, and we'll probably certainly look over these again in the future. Is that what you're saying?
So after this meeting, there's one more following where we have the public hearing. And so that'll be our, I believe, the last opportunity to make comments on what we're proposing. You're more than welcome to provide us with your feedback and your questions about projects and whether other projects should be considered or not.
To speak to that, though, as a planning commission, we have to approve and recommend the list to the city council. Am I correct? So it's not this that we're going to give you feedback. We're going, there may be some questions that we may want to ask in relationship to approving the list. That's, I think, what we might do, and we'll see where we go from there. Because I see six minds turning very quickly over on our side of the dais. So, but thank you very much on behalf of the commission, John, for being here tonight. And Alicia, it's always a pleasure to have you give us all your excellent opinions and being our marvelous consultant. And the city and the citizens appreciate all the effort that you've done for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in March. And if any of you show up on Thursday, and come by and say hi to John and I at the hangar.
Okay, then.
Thank you.
So
Thank
we'll
you.
move to the next item, which is the public services element introduction. And I believe Lori is going to do that for us.
I am. Good evening, newly re-elected Chair Thompson and members of the Planning Commission. So I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about the 2023 docket. That will not be formally approved by the City Council until the 23rd of this month. But I can tell you what the proposal is for the Planning Commission. And as you can imagine, it's focused on our comprehensive plan update. The required update must be finished by December 2024. And as you know, we can only amend the comp plan once a year. So we're working toward one amendment this year and then another amendment next year. So this year, we are recommending that the commission focus on the public services element, which we'll talk about tonight, the utilities element, which we hope to bring to you in February or March. And then following that is the economic development element. And that element will really be focused on work that was done with the economic development strategy a few years ago. But what also is going on at the same time are the conclusion of the transportation element, which you just heard about, and which you'll be holding your hearing on in March. And also the climate change element, which is targeted for this year. And I anticipate, I don't have an exact schedule yet, but I anticipate that it will start coming before you at the beginning or the first half of the year. When all those things are done, then the next two their sub-elements that come up are downtown and community design. And we anticipate that those two will take the remainder of 2023 into 2024. The surface water element is also part of that package that's late 2023 into 2024. So you'll be working a lot with environmental services. They'll be managing both the climate change element and the surface water element. So any questions about that? I don't anticipate any changes in that docket, but we'll confirm that after the 23rd.
For the benefit of those of us that are slow on the verbal uptake, once you get that approved by the council, could you give us just a slight little Gantt chart so that we kind of see where the overlaps are, and especially the point where has to go over the goal line, you know, where we have to vote, and so that all of us have a clear understanding when we come to a meeting, it's time to work and get it done because we have to meet your deadline.
Right. I will do my best with that.
Oh, yeah, I'm just saying, give it a shot, and that
Yeah.
will help. I think a lot of us kind of,
Right.
that's a lot of elements. You just did like eight elements in 12 months.
Well, it'll actually be 5, and transportation is partway done, and then the other 3 will carry over into 2024.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, no, we're not expecting you to, wow, that would really be something.
Well, I
and-
know you're retiring though, so
I am.
unfortunately, so you're just putting it on for your successor there.
Right. Well, the goal, I don't know if this goal will be achieved, is that we'll get through both public services and utilities before the end of March. So that's the plan anyway. I should mention that.
We are all bringing chains to tie you to your chair. You
Oh,
know?
I see.
So, we just have a hard time thinking of someone else sitting in your chair.
Well, I'm sure it'll be a wonderful person. I should mention that part of what is going to be coming before you is affected by the fact that we did get an appeal of the comprehensive plan amendments. We received that last week. And so it's a large staff project to put together the materials for that, which may impact exactly the timing for your next few meetings. So I just throw that out there, just so
May-
you're aware.
May we ask which elements were appealed?
Well, it was a single ordinance. You remember that adopted the vision statement, land use, housing, and capital facilities, and that whole entire ordinance was appealed.
Oh, I see.
So anyway,
But we're not talking about missing middle and all that. It's the first ordinance that they did in the middle of last year.
right, it was November 7th when they adopted it, correct?
Thank you for that information.
Yeah. Anyway, without additional questions, I will turn my attention and your attention to the public services element. That, okay? All right, so both public services and utilities element, the biggest changes really have to do with the background information. This is the time when we contact all different agencies and we ask them to update the information that we have about how services and eventually you'll see the utilities sections, how their services and utilities are provided. So in the public services element, we contacted a number of agencies. We contacted the new North Shore Fire District operator, which is the Shoreline Fire Department. We updated information on emergency management that was done in-house. Police services, our police chief updated that information about how those services are provided. The school district looked over and updated the school information. So the information before you has all been vetted by the appropriate agencies, whether it was the city or an outside agency. And I wanted to particularly call out the city staff section, and that's because we have put into that section an assumption that 2 additional positions will be funded, but that is a city council decision that will be coming before them in the next month or 2. So that may need to be revised. That's for the Housing and Human Services Manager and the Climate Action Manager. So those are in here, but they may need to be pulled out if the city council doesn't move forward. So any questions about the background information, which really is the bulk of the changes you have before you?
Could you, sorry, could you explain to me what a climate action manager's duty and role would be?
Yeah, I am not the right person to answer that question exactly, but you may know that the city adopted a climate action plan last year. And the idea was that a new position would be created to determine what the scope of the city's, what the priorities and scope of the city's actions related to climate change should be, and also to look at the feasibility and possibility of different funding sources. That particular job, if you want to learn more about it, the city council agenda that is out right now, I think for the 23rd, has a discussion of that position as well as the Housing and Human Services position. Both of those at this point are being handled through the city manager's office, although the Housing and Human Services Manager would be in the Assistant City Manager's office, and the Climate Action Manager would be in the Environmental Services Department.
Sure. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Commissioner Lotzes?
Yeah, so in this document, you said you covered, basically, we're discussing most of it right now, is that correct?
Well, we'll go back to the goals, objectives, and policies and talk
Okay.
about those, but I mostly just wanted to tell you where the background information came from and see if you had any questions about that I needed to go back and ask one of the agencies.
So like under the Human Services
Uh-huh.
section, that's open for discussion right now?
It is.
Okay, so one question I had was this mainly had to do something I noticed. Mary's Place provides the address of the where the services are offered, where the location for that service is offered. But there's not as much specification on some of the other programs about where they're located or how to reach them.
Mhm.
One thing I noted in particular was the Crisis Connections 24-hour crisis line.
Mhm.
Would it be feasible or reasonable to put the phone number for that in there? Because I know that the line above that 211, it says that in the title there, and I was curious if there's actually a distinction between the two. I was assuming there was a distinction considering that they're listed separately, but if there is a distinction, would it be reasonable to clarify that a little bit more by putting that separate phone number? And if there's any other particular points throughout where that might also be applicable or appropriate.
Yeah, I am happy to go back and ask that question. I'm turning to the implementation measures section because I think the city I thought at one point that one of the implementation measures was to keep a list, but I actually don't see that. So let me ask about the Assistant City Manager's Office updated this information. So let me ask them about adding in detail where we can.
Or if a list, if there is a list,
Or a
maybe noting that, or if there isn't, putting something like that together that has this information and it says see this line in whatever table or
Right.
whatever might be appropriate.
Right, and it may be that rather than put it here, they would prefer to do it as an implementation measure. And I honestly think that the City Hall receptionist has a lot of this information. So the list may already be created, but we could formalize it,
Okay.
or we can put the information here. I'll ask how they prefer to handle that.
Yeah, my reasoning was just, as I had noted with Mary's Place, there's information there and just sort of standardizing that practice across each of these programs. Thank you.
You bet.
Any further questions? Commissioner Vandeline?
Yes, Lori, Debbie, I'm interested in how these different services and vendors reflect the expected increase in population over time and how that relates to the level of service. Some of the places in here, and I may have read this too fast and missed some of them, but I can see that level of service called out in a number of places, but in a lot of places it isn't.
Mhm.
So is that typically the type of information you'd expect to see as an information?
Commissioner
you ask
Vanderland,
for?
could you please get closer to the
sorry.
mic? We're having
Yes.
trouble hearing you online.
Is that level of service information, information that's typically provided by the service provider? Is it information we could ask for or could put that into a table so we get a sense of what that looks like?
I think it depends on the service. So I think, for example, the police and fire information, I don't know whether their plans specify a certain number of people, you know, they kind of grow as the community grows. So I don't know that they have, you know, a target that in this year we'll have this many people for, depending on level of service. The human services agencies are similar. So it's not quite the same as level of service for utilities, for example, where actually, and I know because I just got their information, they do talk about growth and how many lots they expect and how many households they expect. So it gets more to level of service. I'm happy to go back and ask police and fire particularly whether they do, how they do their planning, and whether they just grow as the community grows or whether they forecast out. That's your question, right?
Yes, I think this is good information for this particular element, but also I'm thinking in the past when we've looked at a number of particular things like economic development and some other progressive changes over time, having that a reference we can go back to and look at that level of service and have that kind of discussion and thinking about that at the time would be useful.
Yeah, it has not historically been included in this element. I can tell you that, but I'm happy to ask them about whether they have, how they do their projections.
Not looking to make more work for you, but it would be
Won't
good
be work for
information to
me,
have.
it'll be work for them.
Oh, okay, well, in that case, go for it.
Well, I think Mike makes a good point, and I believe that when they do long-term budgeting in the budget process, that has to go to the city council. One of the items that they do is they look at a 5-year out of what they may have to expend, which for the police, it's all about how many officers they have to put on the streets, which is all about what is the targeted growth. And then that comes from people like Debbie and the county and so forth, and the Puget Sound Regional Council. Just like what we're having to, they say we have to absorb so many housing units and so many people. So I think that they're in the budget process, they've got some of that data already there.
Right.
So at least it's a guesstimate at worst.
Mm-hmm. And I will say that you can get a sense of that, some of that, by looking at the response times, which they did provide, at least response times from the last time period up to the present. But I'll go back and ask them about their level of service projections and what they anticipate.
I think, again, that would be very useful information. I'm thinking back to not too many years ago when we addressed the problem of a lack of cell service and Wi-Fi access. And we had some questions that went out to the vendors about what was their plans for adding additional service. And we had at that time significant amount of power outages. And there was a question about when were they going to start replacing poles with underground. And we had some very interesting responses. And I think one of the things we learned was they had no plan. So it'd be nice to have an idea of at least what their thinking is. I think this becomes especially acute now in the future here as we're planning increased density. that's going to increase the need for particularly utility as well as public services. And understanding what our expected level of service is and what the impact of those planned density increases that we're purposely looking to create, what impact is that going to have both on the city budget, but also on those vendors? And I think it would be reassuring to know that they're thinking about that.
Commissioner Lutz is.
Yeah, speaking of more of the first responder section, I did have a question about table PSA. I think that's on page 9-12. I know it talks about response times between 2017, or there's a new sort of monitoring date between 2017 and 2021. But in the 2017 column about Kenmore crime rate statistics per 1,000 population, it's all not applicable. And I know that there's the asterisk that says classification of crimes according to this system did not begin until 2019. So what was the purpose for including that column if there's no values?
Sorry, I think at the time they were just acknowledging the difference. That you couldn't make the same connection for 2017. They didn't have the numbers that correlated. Previously they used these different crime rates, part 1 and part 2, so they couldn't correlate them against the 2017 numbers,
Okay.
the different definitions.
Is there, well, I guess, could you clarify what the reason is for including that 2017 column if there is a 2019 and a 2021 column after that?
Yeah, I mean, we could take it out entirely and say that that this classification of crime, this type of classification did not take effect until 2019.
I just wasn't sure if there's a purpose for including a column that didn't really contain values.
Yeah, it was only just to show that there'd been a
Okay.
change in how the crime rates were managed and defined. So,
Okay.
but there's no point, there's no data, right?
Yeah.
So we could show earlier crime statistics that showed part 1 and part 2, but I don't think that would be relevant.
Mhm.
So maybe we just want to not include the 2017 column and just make a footnote that we don't have earlier data that corresponds. Is
Yeah.
that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it could be a little confusing too, unless it says, that another form of measuring was used prior to 2019. Because I think as it sits right now, it sounds like, the reporting didn't begin until 2019.
Right, and that actually is described on the previous page.
Yeah. I think I remember reading
Okay.
that.
All right, so what we can do is remove this column and just start with 2019.
Another question I had, I'll let you finish writing.
Thank you. Okay,
So I know that city council has already gone over budgets and whatnot. And we've talked about anticipated growth, especially with emergency services and utilities and public services and whatnot. I know that there's set values in here. There's 14 commissioned officers for the city of Kenmore. So because the budget has already been approved, is that something that those individual numbers, something that we probably shouldn't touch? Or is it possible to maybe focus on percentages of officers in case that number does increase the next budget cycle before we get to update this comprehensive plan again?
yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
What we've tried to do, even in the housing element, it's a snapshot,
Mhm.
kind of what are current conditions, knowing that those over the 20-year horizon of the plan, they certainly will change.
Okay.
But we'll be updating the plan again in 10 years.
Mhm.
That seems like a long time. But it's intended to be a snapshot of current conditions.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you. Thank you. For
And
the
even if we used a
clarification.
percentage, that might easily change, so.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick question here. I'm going through the human services, and within human services, we have family services and a list of resources available.
Mhm.
mental health is something that's I'm very passionate about, especially post-COVID. But I see a lot of mental health issues coming up, both in my law practice or whatnot. Are there specific mental health resources, counselors, therapeutic services that are available for residents here? I'm looking through this list and I'm trying to see if there's anything specifically for mental health counseling available for families and the youth. And I do think that we probably should be highlighting that, because I think that is going to be a big issue, and if it isn't already, especially post-COVID. So I guess my question is, are there specific services that do provide mental health counseling for families and individuals in Kenmore? And if so, what are they that are listed here? If any.
I'll pursue it.
Yeah.
I know one of them is the crisis centers that they just funded is directly addressing your concern. And that's why Dow and his district has just, I think, put a $2 million or $200,000 grant out to, I think it's 5 crisis centers in his district. I'm just trying to pull from my memory there, so don't take me for the Bible truth, but I do remember that, and that's one of the big governmental programs trying to address the mental health. But maybe another question that might be along those lines is, what funds does the city directly provide for these types of services? Do they provide to a pool of money of intergovernmental agencies?
Yeah, in terms of the human services information, the city funds some of these agencies, but doesn't fund all of them. And maybe that they funded them in the past. This is just a list of agencies that the city is aware of. The behavioral health issues, particularly with regard to police response, the city, that's money that the city just joined with other surrounding jurisdictions to do this regional crisis response agency. That's why we added this new section here to talk about that. And I think that is similar to the crisis centers that Dow Constantine is working on. I don't think it's directly connected to police response, but certainly behavioral health issues. So I think Commissioner Quadri's idea that we see what other kind of mental health services for families, youth, et cetera, we could add to this list if we are aware of them. And then hopefully your concern about behavioral health is addressed by the Regional Crisis Response Agency.
At least in part. I think that, I'm a mental health professional, and I know Saad and I talked a little bit. What he sees in his practice is time and time again, folks that need this type of intervention rather than police intervention. And, it's not just city of Kenmore. This is a major problem. Washington State's been down at the bottom of the per capita spending for mental health. So I think we're interested in what we should put some emphasis in this for these types of services. And the city council can wield their pen with the dollar and the green stuff.
Kenmore, among others, is cities, tend to be very small population within King County. And that creates the need to be able to lean on the county and other super outside of the city services to provide those. And probably one of the facts that I think we tend to lose sight of is that the taxpayers within Kenmore contribute significantly to those counties. A big piece of our sales tax and a big piece of our real estate tax goes back to the county to fund these services, including the ones you just mentioned. It might be useful to make note of that somewhere in this section, that one of the ways that we fund and one of the ways that citizens in Kenmore receive those services or ought to receive a fair share of those services are those that are funded through taxes on Kenmore residents.
An example of that is the MID, M-I-D-D, and that's a tax surcharge on all of us that goes to this fund that is specifically supposed to provide for alternatives to incarceration and diversion types of crisis services at the time of arrest or as a diversion from arrest. And and I believe the suburban or the city organization from the smaller cities is a member of that board. And that's a big deal as far as us being able to make sure that our north end gets a piece of the pie.
I think that, again, I'm happy to add background information here, but I think where we're going with these comments are into the goals, objectives, and policies. And I think actually there are at least one or two that speak to this very issue about joining with other communities to fund efficient municipal services. So maybe what we could do is, if there are more background questions, let's try to get those on the table, and then let's turn to the goals, objectives, and policies and see where we can beef those up.
Commissioner Lutzes.
How big is Bastyr? This one, this campus here. And I ask that because I'm looking at the Bastyr section and it says 742 students over the two campuses, the one here in San Diego. Is it possible to get a number for how many university students there are in Kenmore specifically?
Yeah,
Like
I could get that number.
that snapshot. I think that would be helpful to me.
Okay.
Are there, we lost our Lone Ranger? He's there, he's just not.
He just
okay.
turned his video off.
Oh, okay. He took a break.
I apologize.
No, don't be apologetic. I've done some weird stuff on video too, so no, you can't. You cannot match what I've done. So, let's see here.
Check YouTube.
Yeah, just check YouTube. That's right. So if there's no further questions or comments on this, is there anything else that you need from us tonight?
Well, I'd like to jump into the goals, objectives, and policies and just see where you might think there needs to be additional detail, or if you're comfortable with the edits so far. And then I'll be working on getting the rest, updating this background information for the next time we bring this back to you, which may be on the 7th, but it may be on the 21st. So I'm not quite sure yet.
All right, so.
Cool
Go
question.
ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So Bastyr University, it seems like it's a big part of Kenmore, and it's one of the elements. It's the 8th element under public services. I guess I'm a little confused as to why a private university would be part of this public services element, and is it possible for us to change it under education perhaps, or higher education? If you can kind of explain.
Yeah, sure. So the way this element is divided, it does include public schools, but it doesn't exclusively include public agencies. So for example, in the human services section, those are not public agencies. They're probably, most of them are private nonprofit agencies. Similarly, Bastyr, I assume, is a nonprofit agency. And because it's, I think, the major employer in Kenmore, and because it's a significant piece of property, it was called out because this is where schools, both the public schools and then Bastyr, are addressed. There's not another place in the comp plan that could easily find a home to talk about Bastyr University separately. So I guess I would encourage you to keep the Bastyr University information here with the rest of the school information.
Okay.
Other comments? Suggestions? Desires?
Yeah, so the goals, objectives, and policies mostly were amended to address the city's continued focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One had to do with providing behavioral support. That's policy PS 3.1.3. We've added new language about translation when possible to keep our community informed, but we can do this a number of ways. If you would like to just go through by exception and call out issues that you see that you have concerns about, that's probably the most efficient rather than having me go through every page, but that's up to you.
Well, we can go by exception. So in this case, go ahead, Commissioner Lutzes.
Yeah, I'll start off right at the beginning with objective PS 3.1, actually specifically PS 3.1.1. The first one that calls out community crime education programs and those that encourage neighborhood cohesiveness. Would it be possible to add another program there? I know that Neighborhood Watch is listed, but another one that serves our community, which would include the King County's Explore program. I say that because I know that there's a handful of Kenmore youth who are involved with that, volunteering alongside the local police department here at a lot of community events.
I'll just assume that we can make these changes unless I hear from other commissioners that you have a concern.
Yeah, I'm watching for that too.
Okay, good.
But isn't the, that wouldn't be under NEMCO? Is that what we call them? I can't remember you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And-
NEMCO is the emergency management. I think what Commissioner Lutzes is talking about
Oh,
is
I-
a crime education
But
program.
NEMCO's in there somewhere.
NEMCO is in here. It is, where is it?
I accept that it's there. That's all I
It
wanted
is
to know.
here. Of course, I can't put my finger on it right now, but it is here.
Okay. Other
Yeah, it's
comments?
objective PS 3.3. In coordination with surrounding jurisdictions and special districts, establish an effective emergency management system. And then it talks about coordinating with NUD and the North Shore Fire Department, participate in regional emergency management, et cetera.
Commissioner Banaszewski.
Can we go back to PS1? Okay. I am wondering if we can think about not just communication between the government and people, but connection or engagement with something that's not just simply kind of broadcasting information out, but is more relational.
I like engagement.
Engagement.
I like that term. If
And then in regards to policy PS 1.1.4, I know that there's the translation's important, interpretation's important. There's an idea that was new to me is something called transcreation, where it's not just strictly translation, but it is the language is incorporating kind of the culture and stuff, not just the words. And that might be a good equity goal. Do not just translation, but transcreation when we can.
I would probably add a second sentence to that,
Mhm.
talking about transcreation,
Okay.
if the commission is all right with that.
We're going along if there's a problem. I know that these commissioners speak up.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I'm very certain of.
And then my last comment on this policy one is I very much like policy 1.2.4. Establish ongoing communications with community-based organizations representing constituencies whose voices are not regularly heard. And then just to kind of put a fine point on that, we talked a lot about equitable outreach over the past year. And I wanted to just make a note that it can look much different from traditional outreach. And the expectations, I think, have to be different, and you have to be more responsive and in the moment to what's going on. So I think that I hear that in policy 1.2.4. That's the spirit of it. Yeah, thank you for that. That's really important. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Vanderleen.
Yes, objective PS 5.3. I'm wondering if that might be a good place to work in what we discussed earlier, particularly related to county funds that are funded through taxes on Kenmore citizens. I don't have wording for you, but I think it follows right along with the idea to utilize federal and state funding to help expand programs to fill gaps in services.
So what's the policy direction?
Well, I'm thinking you would add utilize federal, state, and county
Oh,
funding.
okay. Mhm.
That would be the simplest, I think. I think there's another perspective that we might be interested in, but I certainly, but like I was suggesting, there's an actual tax, specialized tax for certain services. And I think maybe the thought might be is that, there's the county real estate tax and the general taxes, and that's one thing. But these specific service taxes, like Medic One, that would be an example, that we make sure that our citizens are getting the piece of that little pie that the services extend. It's been no surprise that over the last 20 or so years, the North End has been kind of left out of things when it comes to the county, although that has vastly improved.
I think that is the main point. There are, I believe, city council members who sit on county boards and county commissions that look at the policy and distribution of those funds that are derived from taxes that are moved on from the smaller cities. And I think that ought to be one of our objectives, is to make sure that Kenmore gets a proportionate share of those dollars to fund the gaps in services within Kenmore.
So I wonder if we could go back to goal PS2, which talks about providing efficient municipal services that meet the needs of the community. And if you look at that first objective, when appropriate, contract with other cities, we could add the county to this, much as we added the county to that later item. And then under that, we could add another policy about ensuring that Kenmore receives adequate consideration with county. I don't know what it's going to read, but
Relative to or proportionate to its contribution to the
right,
King County.
something like that.
Availability of services to its citizens in proportion to the contribution. Maybe that's I hear wordsmithing happening.
Yeah, I'll work on it. How about that?
See, you got us going so early in the evening, once we hit that 9 o'clock, our wordsmithing goes just downhill.
I suppose I have something of a bee in the bonnet over this issue, because I worked on the work group that created the bid and a number of these other funding sources. And I know for a fact where the loudest voices were and where that funding has been historically distributed.
That's right.
And I can guarantee that Kenmore was not anywhere near the top of that list. And that there may be reasons for it in terms of want and need, but I think unless Kenmore and other smaller constituencies within the county speak up, you're never going to rectify that, or never going to see a proportionate share of those dollars.
That's right. I agree with that.
So I'll work on whether this, I'll definitely amend that objective and then work on where it might be a good fit to put this notion that we're going to ensure the availability of county services in proportion to city contributions. Is that's kind of where we're headed, right? Okay.
Commissioner Lutzes.
Yeah, this is addressing 4.2.2 about continuing education programs. I see that the University of Washington Bothell campus is specifically called out. Would it be possible to expand that to the University of Washington and its satellite campuses or affiliates? I say that because I know about a quarter of the graduating class at Inglemoor typically ends up going to the University of Washington, most of those to the Seattle campus, and many of whom probably still live at home for at least part of that time here in Kenmore. So I think it
Maybe I can just take out the reference to Bothell campus and
Yeah.
just say University of Washington,
Okay.
wherever it may be located.
Sure.
Or you can say campuses. There's several campuses in Washington, so they can make it plural.
Anyone else? May I suggest to the commissioners that you take a good look at this draft? Because the next time when Lori brings back the blue highlighted elements that we have went over as suggestions, that will be your last chance to really make suggestions and make any changes, because we have to approve that draft to go to a public hearing. So that'll be it. Now, not to say we can't change things after public hearing, but we should try to have our ideas in soft cement or fairly firm mud by then. We're only having the hearing on this item, right?
No, actually, I would anticipate that your transportation hearing will be held separately. I would anticipate that the climate change hearing would be held separately, but probably for public services, utilities, and economic development, those three would move forward together. So a single hearing
Oh,
there.
down the road.
Down the road,
Okay,
right?
because the one that we're having the hearing on is the transportation. element.
Transportation,
Okay,
correct.
we're not being pushed on this
No,
other.
mm-mm.
Thank you.
No.
Just wanted to be sure. All right. Is there anything else you would like to bring to our attention?
Well, I think the question of your February 7th meeting is before us, because the item to come back to you on February 7th is this element. And because I'm reaching to outside agencies, I can't force them to respond as quickly as we might if it were us doing the work. So I need to reach out to police, and I need to reach out to fire. I need to collect human services information. So I'm sort of hesitant to commit to February 7th. I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
I think what Laurie is in a nice way trying to say is February 7th would be a pretty light agenda. That, you know, we could actually push this to a later meeting and give you the February 7th off, so that we're not actually making stuff up. We're not ready to bring any new items forward on February 7th. So I think that's what she's trying to say. And I would,
Is you want us to cancel?
I think, well,
So-
and I think, you know, just from a staff perspective, and Laurie did mention the appeal, there is a lot of other kind of immediate work that we need to get done. I think this is something which we have time to do. So if we don't do it on February 7th, the world will not end and we can bring it forward at the next meeting in February. So I think what we're asking is the commission comfortable with that approach and okay, or can make a direction to cancel the February 7th meeting.
Okay, so just one more question. So there is no other matter to bring before us on February 7th, is what you're saying?
Correct.
That's ready. We've actually, we're almost going to have 3 months off.
Well, I will say though, that things might heat up later in the year. We might be sort of coming back and saying we might need extra meetings. It's just that right now, we're not ready to bring anything else forward on this.
It's nice to see you both laughing.
Of course, the downside of that is that if we cancel February 7th, that means we get one less day with Lori. So I think we need to have some adjustment, maybe in a retirement date or something.
Yeah,
So we don't lose out on that.
Oh, wow. Okay, so
Motion.
yes, I need a motion. Need a motion to cancel the meeting.
I move we cancel the meeting.
It's been moved and seconded
Second.
that we cancel the February 7th meeting at the recommendation of staff. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any objections? No, no nays. So it's unanimously passed. Rita, you have the night off on February 7th. Yay, all right. Now, is there anything really important that you want us to deal with tonight?
Well, you've got through the agenda, so I'm not going to
Okay,
make
good.
anything else up.
Is there anything else for the good? That's good. Is there anything for the good of the order? Okay, Commissioner Banziski.
Can you remind me, Lori, about when you're going to sail off into new horizons?
March 31st. It will
March
be my last day.
31st. Okay. Wow. You have big shoes to fill. Yeah.
Well, presumably someone
Yeah.
will be able to do that
Yeah.
easily.
Well,
We're hoping for some overlap.
I think somebody will be able to do it, but not just like you.
Oh, thank you.
Any other issues for the good of the order? Hearing none, it is 8:34 and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Saad. Nice to see you.
It's a pleasure being part of this commission, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon. I'll be present in person next time. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.